Happy Sunday, Who Dat Nation. I'm back from a little bit of we can't even call it a vacation. I was working, Bob, but I'm gone from a hiatus, and I'm happy to be back with you guys here on the Bayou Blitz pregame show. Bob and Kyle held it down last week. I'm Brendan Boylan. That's the sickly Bob Rose. Don't give me whatever you got through the computer screens and whatnot. But Bob, outside of sounding a little stuffy, how you doing?
Boy, I tell you, Brendan, I know I look and I definitely feel like I could be an extra on The Walking Dead. But as long as they don't pay me, to do so, you guys are stuck with me. Unlike some of our New Orleans Saints players, I'm going to limp through this the best I can.
Oh man, Bob's taking early shots today. Well, that is definitely a point of discussion today. The New Orleans Saints remain banged up. There's a couple of game time decisions today, some really crucial game time decisions, including a guy named Paulson Adebo, because it looks like Devontae Adams is going to play, and Marshawn Lattimore is going to miss another week this week, along with Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry. Adam Troutman's not expected to play today either. So Bob, I guess let's start right there. Obviously, the big news this week was that Andy Dalton was going to start for the Saints and will start for the Saints today at quarterback, despite Jameis Winston being healthy enough. Dennis Allen calling it strictly a decision based off performance for Dalton, which we both, I think, have similar views on that. But the Saints aren't giving Dalton a whole lot of help in terms of weapons. There were some moves made yesterday. Keith Kirkwood's contract was terminated. The Saints elevated Kevin White, standard elevation from the practice squad. Chris Harris Jr. was signed to the active roster. Am I missing anything from yesterday, Bob?
No, I think you got all the major points. And the news about Dalton, I think a lot of us found it a little bit surprising because we did feel that Jameis Winston would probably get the nod again, and be inserted back into the lineup after a few extra days coming off of Thursday's loss to last Thursday's loss to the Arizona Cardinals. Remember Winston had dressed as an emergency quarterback the last two games. Then right after Dennis Allen announced his decision, and he did so early in the week, we were hearing news come out that Jameis is not only dealing with that back injury, the four broken vertebrae, but a torn ligament in his foot. So obviously that young man is nowhere near healthy. But it's also very clear to me that Dennis Allen and probably Pete Carmichael are more enamored with the stability that Andy Dalton can bring to their offense. And you look at the sheer numbers, the passing numbers between Dalton and Winston are pretty identical, completion percentage, yards per game, et cetera. But Dalton takes care of the ball better. He's thrown four interceptions, which I know caused a lot of Saints social media to poke fun of. What do you mean he takes the ball, care of the ball better? But those four Dalton interceptions, three of them were last week. So outside of that, Andy's only thrown one interception. The offense under Andy Dalton has averaged 31 points and 417 yards per game, while under Winston it was 17 points and 373 yards per game. Now Dalton has benefited from a much more productive running attack. His rushing attack when he's in is 165 yards per outing, while under Winston it was 112. Dalton's got much better protection. He's been sacked 4 times as opposed to Winston's 11 times in 3 games. To be fair, Dalton gets rid of the ball a hell of a lot faster than Jameis, who tends to hold on to the ball for big plays. On the flip side, the defense played much, much better with Jameis Winston at quarterback, than it has with Andy Dalton. Let's face facts, folks. The defense has been non-existent since Dalton's been in. But you're right. The Saints just are not able to give much help, around Dalton, because every single one of Dalton's starts, including today, he's going to be without Michael Thomas, without Jarvis Landry. He was without Chris Olave for a game. Adam Troutman is going to miss his second straight game. Again, you look at that, with a skeleton crew. With a skeleton crew, I think it is the right decision to start Dalton this week.
Yeah, all things considered, I think earlier in the week, especially before the news broke that Jameis was dealing with torn ligament in the foot and ankle area, without that information, you think, okay, Jameis has already tried to play through the back injury once. He's had some weeks to rest up and heal. I think he's going to be good to go. I think the foot injury brings a whole nother level to the decision. Let's look at the Saints inactives. Official. They just dropped via our John Hendricks, Jarvis Landry, Michael Thomas, Marshawn Lattimore, Wyatt Davis, Adam Troutman, and Carl Granderson will be inactive this week. Good news for the Saints. Former first-round pick Peyton Turner will be back out on the field this week. Remember, he had the big block at the end of the game, the field goal attempt at the end of the game back in week 1, and the Saints really haven't seen him since. So should help a pass rush against a pretty weak Las Vegas Raiders offensive line. And this is an interesting thing, Bob, and we talked about it on Wednesday with the guys out there in Vegas, Jason and Tom, is that this is a Raiders team that is probably better than what their record says, but then you dive into the statistics of it, and this is not a very good Raiders team. The offensive line has been really beat up. They're very young. They're still learning how to play with each other. The secondary's beat up and young and still learning how to play with each other. And then their rush defense as well. They trade away a big piece last week or this week, and the rush defense hasn't been great either. And from a fantasy standpoint, it was really interesting because the Raiders are 29th in the league in terms of points allowed to fantasy running backs, 32nd in the league in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. And you go, wow, the Saints should really feast today. But this is a Saints offense, even under Andy Dalton, that has shown you some highs and shown you some lows. Looking at the Saints from a rushing standpoint, and that's the part where I think the Saints could really get the upper hand in this game, is you're going to have Kamara, you're going to have Ingram, you're going to have Taysom Hill. You're pretty healthy in that spot. And I got to throw Taysom Hill in there, even though he's a tight end.
Oh, yeah.
Quote, air quotes, tight end, because of how effective he has been on the ground this year. And even though you didn't see a whole lot of it against Arizona, he caught a touchdown against Arizona. I think you're going to see a little bit more of that Taysom Hill package. You're going to see a lot more of Alvin Kamara, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Mark Ingram have an increased touches this week as well. Remember, Kamara has had some good games in the past over the last couple of years, especially that game out in Vegas 2 years ago. Kamara had a strong performance. I could see him replicate that in the Superdome this week. Bob, that's one of the things I'm looking for the Saints to do today to come out victorious. That's run the football. Is there something differently that you might see?
No, I think that the Saints are definitely going to look to establish balance and control of the line of scrimmage early in the game. One of the key individuals matchups to watch, and I highlighted this too yesterday, I believe. The Saints offensive tackles versus the Raiders edge rushers. You're looking at James Hurst and Ryan Ramczyk versus Max Crosby and Chandler Jones. And that's not only, to protect Andy Dalton when he drops back to pass, but that's also in the run game as well. Kamara and Taysom Hill are both most effective in off-tackle plays. Now, the interior line of the Saints are going to have to get push off the line of scrimmage and open up those cutback lanes. But Kamara and Hill are most effective in space and off tackle. So Hurst and Ramczyk are going to have to handle Max Crosby and Chandler Jones. Again, not only in the running game, but the short passing game and pass protection as well for Andy Dalton. But yeah, I do expect Kamara to be heavily used. It's time to accept, folks, that Taysom Hill, not Mark Ingram, is the primary complement to Alvin Kamara. You're right, Brendan. Ingram is going to get 8 to 10 touches a game. Most of those are going to be either in short yardage, just to give Kamara a breather, or goal line situations. But the primary rushing threat outside of Alvin is going to be Taysom Hill. And that's not a bad thing because Pete Carmichael, I think, say what you will about his general decision making. I think he has designed some outstanding packages to optimally utilize Taysom Hill's skill set and keep opposing defenses off balance. And I think we'll see a lot more of that today, especially against the Raiders secondary. Their best safety, or their most highest regarded safety, Jonathan Abram. He's like an extra linebacker. You don't want that guy in coverage. And the Raiders cornerbacks, like you pointed out, they're a young group. Probably probably the one unit outside of maybe the Vegas's offensive line that you could say has struggled game in and game out. Now they'll be going up against the Saints receiving core that really only has Chris Olave and a bunch of guys that are backups at best. But having going in with that thought, that's all the more reason to utilize what Taysom Hill, the different looks Taysom Hill can give to a defense, utilize control or establish control of the line of scrimmage, your running game, and your balance to give Dalton an extra second for those backup receivers to get separation.
Let's go ahead and give you guys the inactives for the Las Vegas Raiders. Jayon Brown, Jackson Barton, the tackle. Darren Waller might be the biggest name on this list who's going to be inactive. He tore the Saints up in Las Vegas a few years ago. Matthew Butler, Tashawn Bowser, and Britton Brown are all inactive for the Raiders today. That does mean Devontae Adams is going to give it a go. He was questionable with an illness. He was going to be a true game time decision. And Darren Waller was as well with his hamstring. Bob, without Waller, you look at Devontae Adams and you look at what he was able to do all those years in Green Bay. He comes to Vegas. He has Derek Carr, who I still think is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Adams has played well, but there's been some questions about the rest of this Raiders offense outside of Jacobs and Adams. What are your thoughts on the Oakland, or rather Las Vegas? See, I can't get used to it either, Bob. What's your thought on the Las Vegas Raiders offensively this year, and what's been the problem so far for a team that a lot of people expected to surprise people this year?
Well, let's start with the problem. The problem has been up front. Just as our guests, from Las Vegas radio, sports talk radio, Jason Halpern and Tom Viola pointed out the other night. The Raiders have really struggled up front, outside of left tackle Colton Miller, who I think could step in and start for most teams in the league. Even Josh Jacobs, who's been an absolute monster over the last 3 games, a minimum of 140 yards on the ground in those three, maybe 4 contests. So the Raiders, just like the Saints, are going to look to establish control of the line of scrimmage. Look to use their best weapon, Josh Jacobs. Carr has averaged 10 less pass attempts over those last 3 or 4 games. But the targets to Devontae Adams have increased. And why wouldn't they? I mean, Devontae Adams, I don't think he's the best receiver in the National Football League, but he is certainly top 10, and one could make an argument definitely for top 5. The Saints encountered a top 5 receiver last week at DeAndre Hopkins and did so without Marshawn Lattimore and without Paulson Adebo, and we saw the results of that. So the Saints defensive coordinators, that 3-headed monster of Dennis Allen, Chris Richard, and Ryan Nielsen, they're going to have to devise plays to not allow Carr easy completions to Devontae Adams. But outside of that, Darren Waller being out and Paulson Adebo being in, I think is key for the Saints. But don't sleep on Mac Hollins, the number 3 wide receiver for the Raiders. He is a legitimate deep threat. And Hunter Renfrow is a terrific possession receiver underneath. If the Raiders can get those guys involved, and the Saints secondary cannot find a way to deal with them and Devontae Adams at the same time, it's going to be a long day for that defense. Again, and the key up front, when you're missing Bradley Roby, when Paulson Adebo is hobbled and Marshawn Lattimore chooses not to, is sidelined again, with an injury, what do you have to do? Well, you have to win your battles up front. You have to get interior pressure or interior disruption, especially against the Vegas rushing game, to give Josh Jacobs a little bit of hesitation in the backfield. And the Saints defensive ends have to win their battles. Again, not just in the running game, but also you need consistent pressure on Carr to force him to get rid of the ball sooner than he's comfortable with.
It's going to be interesting to see how the Saints battle this receiving corps, and I'm really glad that you brought up the 2 names that you did in Hollins and Hunter Renfrow, because Hollins has had a really good year. He's been a fringe and a guy for fantasy as well in PPR leagues, whether you pick him up or not. And you look at Hunter Renfrow, I got to see a lot of him being out here in the Carolinas during his time in college. And obviously, I mean, who can forget the big catch that won the national championship at the buzzer for him? But a guy that was a walk-on that has really found himself a really nice role in the NFL. He's the true definition of a slot guy. And with the Saints as hobbled as they are in the secondary, I could definitely see a guy like Hunter Renfrow eat up in the short to intermediate routes today against New Orleans. So that'll be an interesting thing. I think the one thing for New Orleans this year that one of many things, but I think one of the biggest things and something you and I have talked about for weeks and weeks and weeks is the interior of this defensive line just not showing up. Still waiting for a big game from Onyemata. I did a piece talking about X factors this week and highlighted Marcus Davenport. I know it's going to be more outside than interior, but just talking defensive line as a whole, Davenport's in a contract year and has half a sack this year. Yes, 15 quarterback hurries. That's nice. And it's nice to get there. But when you can't finish the job, and it doesn't look like a lot of people outside of Davenport have been able to finish the job, that's where it gets concerning. Is this going to be the game for Davenport? How do the Saints utilize Peyton Turner with him being healthy? You know, Cameron Jordan's knocking on the door of Ricky Jackson's franchise record with sacks. I think he needs 3.5 more sacks to go. Where is it going to come from the Saints defense? Because you look over the last half decade for New Orleans, and it really looked like the tide was turning. This wasn't an offensive team anymore. Those last 5 years, this is a defensive team. Defense is going to win championships and win division titles. And you look at what the Saints have done the last couple weeks, and it hasn't been good. You know, we were praising the defense for keeping the Saints in games early in the year, like you mentioned, when Jameis was starting ball games. But since Andy Dalton's came along, the Saints defense really hasn't kept them in ball games. And you could make the case against Arizona, because I saw a lot of people tweet something like this or say things like this. Well, the Saints gave up 40. No, the Saints defense didn't give up 40. You know, they gave up points, but 14 of those go on Andy Dalton, or one goes on Marquez Callaway, the other goes on Andy Dalton. I just don't think the Saints have done enough. And you're facing a team, like I said, even though a weak offensive line, they have one of the better quarterbacks in the league. They have a top running back. They have a top receiver. Is this going to be the game where this defensive line breaks out? Because I'm still waiting. You're still waiting. And who's gonna solidify themselves in the middle? You know, Onyemata hasn't been great. Shy Tuttle, you know, has had his moments. I know a lot of people, myself included, like what Shy Tuttle can bring as a rotational defensive lineman, but Passanio, one of your guys from last year, hasn't made any noise. Contavious Street hasn't made a whole lot of noise, and we all thought that was a really underrated signing this offseason. So, Bob, if you had to pick one guy on that Saints defensive line to break out and potentially have that game today, who is it?
It's the easy choice. It's Cam Jordan. Cam Marcus Davenport, more often than not, Marcus Davenport is going to be against Colton Miller, the best Raiders offensive lineman, hands down, really. The defensive tackle position, I've given up, expecting much from them, because we're going into week 8 and we haven't seen it thus far at all. So you got to look you got to look at the most consistent veteran on your defense, and certainly your defensive line, and that's Cam. I think if Cam can cause some disruption, that'll obviously force the Raiders to double team him, and perhaps leave either single blocking, one-on-one blocking for Davenport on the other side, or one of those tackles on the inside, or at the very least spread out the blocking for a Demario Davis or Pete Werner inside blitz. And that's really been the only way the Saints have gotten inside pressure this year, is when they brought Demario on an inside blitz. I mean, Davis leads the team in sacks and is second in quarterback hurries. But if you're looking for a guy to be a difference, and you're a vet man, I would go with Cam. But this defensive line, you're right. The defense only gave up 28 points to Arizona. But remember, the Cardinals were going with 4th and 5th string running backs and backups at all 3 interior line positions. The Saints got 2 sacks, both of them the result of coverage, good coverage. It wasn't, because of pressure. And over the last 4 games, New Orleans has allowed opposing quarterbacks to complete 69% of their throws for an average of 261 yards with 8 touchdowns, 1 interception. And over that span, there have been 4 100-yard receivers and 3 more players with at least 70 yards receiving against the Saints. Guys, that's downright abysmal. There's not much you can do. Yeah, we could point to the Saints' disappointing play, and I'm putting it politely, at safety. But the cornerback unit is so banged up. You need to protect those guys by getting pressure from your front four. You have to be able to do it without bringing a defensive back as a blitzer, because you need those safeties, and that extra defensive back in coverage to protect against the big plays. Something that the Saints have surrendered an awful lot of, over the last month as well. So Cam, Davenport, they're my two best bets to make a difference. But this defensive tackle position, whether as a unit or one of those individuals, they have to do something, because they've been downright invisible this year.
And last week too, I think you'd mentioned it already, but I think anytime you face one of the better receivers in the league without a guy like Marshawn Lattimore, you're going to have problems. But Hopkins' first game back from suspension, and he tore you apart on the whole route tree. I mean, 10 receptions for 100+ yards. And at times it looked like Hop was in slow motion. He was still getting adjusted to game speed again, and he still tore you up. So, yeah, this has been a Saints secondary that's disappointed. You talked about the safeties in particular. I mean, there was so much hype. And maybe it was unfair hype because of where he is at in his career, right? But Tyrann Mathieu brought so much hype, and you've said it. Other people have said it. I think I've said it. It's great that Mathieu came back. It's great for jersey sales. It's a great story. I'm happy that he's here. It's a neat story, especially when you're on our side of the screen and we get to write and talk about it. It's fun. But the guy's made a lot of business decisions this year. The tackling, I don't want to say it's as bad as it was in 15, because that was a team from disastrous times. But I'm seeing some of these catch and runs in some of these games, particularly against the Bengals. And you look at the Jamar Chase catch and run, and it was like watching 2015 all over again.
Yep.
And that was the first year that I covered this team. So as you can imagine, I got a big welcome to the NFL in terms of analysts and reporting. But this is a team that was such a sure tackling team over the last couple years, and it seems like all of a sudden they've lost it, Bob.
Yeah, they have, and it's not. It's not just Tyrann Mathieu. He's the biggest culprit in my view, but it's the entire unit. And I know people want to criticize the coaches, and listen, I'm right there with you. There's a list of grievances that I have against Dennis Allen in particular, and the entire staff in general. But it's not the coaches that show a lack of effort. And yeah, I said effort, in tackling. It's not the coaches that are putting themselves in poor positioning to tackle. And by the way, tackle positioning is also a big chunk of effort. These guys, we're so used to the Saints defense just swarming to the ball every single play, and we're not seeing that. And we're seeing more than just number 32, but again, he's the main culprit. They go up to tacklers when they do actually have an angle, and I've literally seen them lay up like that. I can't use the phrase that I want to use when I see it, but I'm just like, what the heck? This defense. Yeah, I understand the injuries in the secondary. I understand the poor play at defensive tackle, but when you have the opportunities to keep a play at a minimum gain at the second level, you need to do that and allow yourself to fight another day. And that's the poor effort, poor technique, and poor positioning. Those are three bad strikes to have.
Looking at this team and what's made them special over the years, I talked about how good the defense has been, but I like to think that one thing that's made this team really special in our time covering the team, Bob, is the continuity amongst the locker room. And it's not just us that say it, it's the national media, it's other teams that say the Saints have one of the best bond of brothers of anybody in the league. And this week, or last week, following the loss against Arizona, Alvin Kamara, a first-year captain, stepped up and spoke to the locker room about getting the Saints type of swagger back. What do you make of Alvin's comments, or at least what he shared to the media? One, And two, what do you make of it? Alvin Kamara able to step up and kind of take that leadership role.
I like the fact that Alvin is stepping up, and being a little bit more vocal. Hopefully, it reflects in his play. And he has played well in recent weeks. Don't get me wrong. But my question is, where was that from Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Dennis Allen? It should have happened 3 or 4 weeks prior. You'd like to think, and certainly hope that this will light a fire under these guys' butts. But it was highly disappointing to me to hear Kamara point out that guys are jumping off sides and making mistakes in practice. And everybody is kind of laughing about it and just laughing it off. There's no accountability. Guys are dropping passes. There's no account. AK-41 is just as big a culprit as anybody on that one. Guys are showing poor effort, in routes, or defensive effort, and there's no accountability. Well, I'll circle back to the coaches. That's where the biggest criticism of the coaches have to come in. This entire team is disappointing this entire season so far because of all those things that Alvin Kamara mentioned has been the problem so far. It shouldn't. These guys are professionals. It shouldn't take a coach or a player stepping up and calling anybody out. But sometimes when that does happen, it marks a turnaround in a team's season, and the Saints are in desperate need of a turnaround right now.
Absolutely. The one thing I found interesting that Kamara said in one of his locker room interviews is he continued to reference Sean and Drew and saying they're not here anymore. And one day I'm going to be gone. And one day Cam's going to be gone. And one day DeMario is going to be gone. That doesn't stop the Saints from playing football. And for me, at least, it was one of the first times that I'd seen, because Kamara's a pretty even keel guy. And even in that interview, he was a pretty even keel guy. But it's one of the first times I've seen true frustration in an interview with Alvin Kamara over the years that we've had a chance to cover him, right? We've seen the frustrations on the field, obviously. It's the first time you could tell he was really frustrated. And I'm curious to see how the Saints respond when you have a guy of that caliber come out and make a comment like that. We don't have a whole lot of time left, Bob, but I do want to get to this before we talk about keys to the game and who's going to win. And this from Scoob. Kamara to the Eagles is what all of his Philly people were saying. I'm going to say it. Check it out on Saints News. John Hendricks just put an article out this morning on that. The reports are false. The Saints have no intent of shopping Alvin Kamara or trading Alvin Kamara. Go get the details from John Hendricks. Head to saints.media. It's the #1 article on there. There is, frankly, not a whole lot of truth to the reports of Kamara to the Eagles this week. That's a whole different discussion for a different day, Bob. We don't have enough time for that. But no, you guys can get all the details from our John Hendricks. Again, saints.media. It's the first article on the site this morning. Bob, let's go into some of the keys to the game. What do the Saints need to do? One of my favorite questions in this type of environment is, the Saints will defeat the Raiders today if blank.
Obviously, they take care of the ball. That's the primary reason they lost last week. Offensively, obviously, you need plays from Olave. You need Dalton to be efficient. You need Kamara and Taysom Hill to be effective and productive. To do that, you need to win your battles at the line of scrimmage, especially, as I highlighted earlier, Ryan Ramczyk versus Max Crosby and James Hurst versus Chandler Jones. If those two men can win those battles, the Saints will have a successful offensive performance. Defensively, you have to. I'm thrilled that Paulson Adebo is playing. Hopefully, he's not too hobbled. Because Chris Harris, as we saw last week. Chris Harris is no longer effective as a starting cornerback. You need to limit his snaps. Most of those targets to DeAndre Hopkins were when he was lining up on Harris's side. And that's the thing. Without Marshawn Lattimore, the Saints aren't going to shadow Devontae Adams with Adebo or Alontae Taylor. And by the way, Alontae played very well last week. So I'm anxious to see if he could capitalize on that momentum. But the Saints secondary, as we mentioned before, you have to you have to keep Carr from completing the easy ones all day long. When he does, you have to make that immediate tackle to keep it at a minimal gain. And the defensive line, particularly along the edge, since I've given up hope on the defensive tackles, Cam Jordan, Marcus Davenport, get into that Raiders backfield, snuff out Josh Jacobs, take care and bottle up that that Raiders running game, and force Carr to beat you through the air on short passes. Because I do expect the Saints to to keep extra guys in coverage all day long to prevent against a big play. If you could keep those plays at a minimal gain, limit Josh Jacobs' effectiveness and pressure Carr, then I think the Raiders are going to score points. They're just way too talented at the skill positions not to. But I think that maybe the Saints could actually pull out a couple turnovers, from Carr, or Jacobs is a known fumbler too. If you get him to put the ball on the ground a couple times, or Carr to throw passes to your guys, then I think the Saints will be able. If the Saints win the turnover battle, that's the key to the game.
Stole the words right out of my mouth. I don't know off the top of my head how many times the Saints have actually won the turnover battle this season. I don't even know if they've won one game.
I don't know.
With the turnover battle, right? We're sitting here. I don't know.
Seattle, maybe. I don't know.
See, I honestly have no idea. That's something we'll have to look at and have for our halftime show. But I was going to say the Saints are going to win this game if they win the turnover battle. And I mean, that sounds simple. It's a simple part of the game every week, right? Your top things every week: win the turnover battle, be special on special teams, right? It's always something in that order. But this week, especially, a game that feels like a must-win for the Saints to stay in the NFC South race, which the NFC South's really bad this year. I don't think anybody would have predicted that right from the jump. And if anybody did, props to them, because I had this being a division that had 2 playoff teams in it.
Yeah.
Right? I think you did too. So
yep.
Win the turnover battle, 1. And 2, you're not going to stop Josh Jacobs, but slow Josh Jacobs down. I'm way more comfortable, even though I did give Carr credit. He's one of the better quarterbacks in the league. I'm way more comfortable if the Raiders are able to be one-dimensional with Derek Carr than Josh Jacobs, who's been on an absolute tear so far the last couple weeks. Well, Bob, final score predictions before we go.
I know earlier in the week when we had Tom Bayou and Jason Halpern on with us, I predicted a higher scoring game. I believe at the time 34-31. I'm going to lower that score a little bit, but the Saints have their backs to the wall. They have one of their quietest leaders speak up against them this past week. They are in a desperate situation. And yeah, like you said, Brendan, mathematically, if they lose, they're not out of it because the division is just so bad. But I feel like if they lose this game at home, that the season is in very, very real danger of spiraling into a dysfunctional tailspin. So these Saints are a desperate team. I still have faith in a lot of those guys in the huddle and in that locker room, and I think they're going to battle today. I hope they're going to battle today. I'm going to go with the Saints, pulling out this one 27-24.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what my prediction was earlier this week, but I think I'm going to go a little bit different because I believe I had the Raiders winning. But especially after what we've heard this week, and you expect this team to come out with a different type of chip on their shoulder, I'll take the Saints. I think Vegas has the game closer to a combined score of 50 than they do 40. And I think I'm going to tend to agree with them in that because the Raiders are too talented to keep them out of the end zone. So I'm going to take the New Orleans Saints 31-28 because the Saints are going to win on a Will Lutz field goal because kicking's for losers.
Yes.
You guys joined us Wednesday. Kicking is for losers. I'm telling you, we got to get T-shirts made. But that's how I'm going to take it. 31-28 Saints. Bob, real quick, how can everybody follow you on the World Wide Web?
Folks, thanks for tuning in with us this morning. Thanks for bearing with me and my zombie-like nature. If I'm alive, Make sure you join Brendan and I for our halftime show. Hopefully we'll be in good moods, and break down the first half performance, of the Raiders Saints game. In the meantime, you can follow me on Facebook, Bob Rose. I'm over on Twitter at BobbyR2613, and all of our works are through the Saints News Network on Facebook or at Saints News on Twitter. And folks, if you're tuning in, I'm sure you already are a part of. But if you aren't, or if you could pass the word around, get people involved more with our Bayou Blitz Facebook page.
And there you have it. Bob Rose, myself, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. Make sure you connect with us on Twitter as well at Bayou Blitz Pod. I do apologize to some of you guys that I said if you don't have social, email us. Bob, get this. They've shut our email down, and I can't recover it.
Wow.
So we're going to have to get that restarted and re-going for you guys, so the guys without social media can interact and email us and tell us what you guys want to hear, because you guys are important too. Just because you're not on social doesn't mean we can't hear your wonderful opinion. So if any of you guys have sent an email, I apologize. Google blocked the email.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of weird. I don't really have an explanation for it. But anyway, until then, guys, you can find us on the World Wide Web. You can find us on the Saints News Network. Catch up with some of our articles before kickoff. Just type in saints.media. We'll see you guys at halftime. Bob, go get some Dayquil or something. Make sure you're alive. Not the NyQuil. Make sure it's the orange, not the purple or whatever color that is. I don't want to see you dead asleep on the halftime show. But feel better, buddy, and hope you guys enjoy the game. We'll see you at halftime.